Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ and Friends. The guest today is quadruple board certified Dr. Roger Schwelt. He's been on the show before, and he's here today to talk about what role forgiveness can play in healing. Please welcome him back to the show. It's so good to see you again.
Thanks, Chef AJ. Good to be here.
Yeah, Dr. Schwelt, I lived in Southern California for many years, and I don't miss it a lot, but I miss having you as my doctor.
Well, thanks. Today, actually, as it turns out, we've got a little bit of precipitation and rain. So if that makes you feel any better.
Yeah, well, that's that you're the one of the one things I missed. And I don't know if people know this. I mean, they may know you from your thriving YouTube channel with over 1.5 million subscribers, MedCrab, but you're a real doctor. You're not just a YouTube sensation, like you actually see patients.
I do, yeah, both in the hospital and also in the clinic, and we do sleep medicine as well. So yeah, every day.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's sleep medicine, emergency medicine, pulmonary medicine, and internal medicine, right?
Yes, critical care medicine instead of emergency, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's it's critical stuff. So ICU basically.
So just 4 board certifications, kind of an underachiever, aren't you?
Well, it sounds like a lot, but to get to critical care medicine and pulmonary, you've got to do internal medicine on top of that. So, and then sleep is kind of an add-on. So yeah, a little bit.
Do you have a favorite?
At first I really liked critical care medicine. I just did pulmonary to get in there, but as time has gone on, you can only do critical care medicine is not an old man's game. It's a young man's game. So it can exhaust you after about 10 or 15 years. So I'm glad for sleep medicine and pulmonary medicine to sort of round things out.
Well, you were kind of on the front lines during the beginning of the COVID pandemic, weren't you?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's those were a few years there that I don't know if I'll ever forget, but yeah, we created new intensive care units in the same hospital because we had twice to three times as many patients as we normally would have. And these were really sick patients, and we had to sort of come up with things on the run. It was almost like being not to take anything away from warfare, but or these MASH units that were out there, but it kind of felt a little bit like that.
It must have been really scary, especially at the beginning when you didn't know what you were dealing with.
Yeah, there was a lot of anxiety all around, not just the patients coming in, not knowing what was going on, but also us trying to take care of them. And then, our concern, of course, at the end of the day was taking this home to our family. But we went out there and we did what we needed to do.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for your
Yeah.
service. So, yeah. So, oh, actually, you actually talked about this last time on the show. You are one of the people that I don't know if you discovered it or just expounded on the fact that sunshine had helped some of these patients or just patients in general helping them heal.
Yeah, I mean, certainly didn't discover it. It's been known for a long time, but maybe sort of rediscovered it in my own mind, and really got the message out. And the more information that we looked up, the more I realized that this is really something that is underutilized dramatically. I mean, if we look at right now, we're recording this here in late December. The This is the days when the sun is the shortest. And if you look at all-cause mortality from just about any natural cause, whether it's kidney disease, heart disease, lung disease, pneumonia, influenza, it all peaks at this time, every single year around this time. And and if you look at in Australia, for instance, right now when the days are long and they're in summertime, that's when they have the lowest amount of disease. At the same time that we're having, epidemics, it seems like, of influenza. That seems to be going around a lot right now in the ICU, by the way, is a lot of influenza. So I think that there's a lot to be said for the effect of sunlight on the human body. And I believe that vitamin D is a marker of that. And we've known for years now, especially in COVID-19, that vitamin D is a marker of who's going to get better and who isn't. And of course, we started giving people vitamin D, but vitamin D may have an impact, but certainly not as much as just getting out in the sun.
I used to be an activity director at a retirement home, and I think about how little they ever went outside. I mean, unless they had an appointment. And it's even worse if somebody is like bedridden in a nursing home. People generally don't go outside if they're sick or in a hospital.
Yeah, and I can tell you myself, I've been getting my patients in the intensive care unit when I can outside. It's hard to do that because it's difficult to detach them from the hospital because they're unstable. But I had an amazing story of a lady that called me. and relayed her experience to me. Amazing. She's a mother of a 15-year-old who developed cancer, ALL actually, which is acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And he was put on chemotherapy. And as you know, chemotherapy reduces your immune system. It's one of the things that you have to do, though, to potentially cure yourself of this cancer. And in early June, this was in Minnesota, he was admitted to the hospital with neutropenic fever, which is basically where you have a low white blood cells because of the chemo, and a fever because you're battling something. To make a long story short, he developed a very severe flesh-eating fungal infection in his lung to the point where the only way that they were able to cure him was to remove his entire left lung. That was just devastating, and they did it in hopes of saving his life. Well, unfortunately, after they removed his left lung, the right lung became involved with the same infection. And of course, you can't remove the right lung. He's only got one lung left. And he, despite very powerful antifungal medications, it got to the point where he just could not survive because his oxygenation requirements were going up. He was on a BiPAP machine, and he was there in the ICU. They had a big family meeting after they got this CAT scan, and they were just very devastated to hear that, if he were to be put on a ventilator, he would not be able to get off and he would not survive. So they gave him about 2 days to live, actually. And it was quite devastating. The mother was telling me this. She was almost like breaking down, just repeating the story. And they came to him and says, "What do you want to do?" And this 15-year-old guy was completely awake, completely alert, oriented, understood what was happening, realized that, he only had a couple of days to live. And they asked him, "What do you want to do?" And his dying request was, "I want to go outside." This was about 6 weeks now that he had been in the hospital. This was in mid-July. And he just wanted to get outside. So the staff, of course, were willing to do anything possible to just give this guy his dying wish because they felt so powerless over this fungal infection that was ostensibly going to take his life. So they did everything. They put oxygen tanks together. They put him in a hospital bed. They were able to get him downstairs. They got him actually outside, and he went outside for about 5 hours. And wouldn't you know, the fever started to dissipate. The white blood cell count started to come down. He went out again the next day and the next day. And they were also, the family had given him a little bit of a light device called a Firefly that he was doing, which was just basically shining infrared and ultraviolet light on his body. But he was getting outside. And wouldn't you know it, is after 5 days, his oxygen requirements came down dramatically. In fact, the doctors were saying, we must be wrong about something. We need to get him into another CAT scan because if he's getting better, maybe we can get him back on chemotherapy and get him cured. Well, they put him in the CT scan. And when they took the CT scan, everybody gathered in the room and the images. And as the images came up, there was a gasp in the room. There was even like swear words, the mom told me, because what they saw was almost a complete eradication of the infiltrating fungal infection. I actually have the CT scan. She sent them to me, and I've seen them, and I've actually had them posted on a channel that we did on a video that we did on MedCram. 2 months later in October, 3 months later in October, no sign of the infection anywhere. It's dramatic. And so I do believe that sunlight plays a dramatic role in our health. And we can talk more about that in a little bit when we start talking about the topic of today. But I believe that we have really lost out on a major force in our body that can do a dramatic amount of help. We've talked about sleep. I'm a sleep doctor. And it being dark at night is very important, but also getting bright sunlight during the day. Not very long, but maybe 15, 20, 30 minutes is really what we need. And here's the problem is that during this time of year when it's wintertime, you know this, we get up in the morning, even here in Southern California, I get up in the morning and the sun is not yet up. I have to get to work. And by the time I get to work, the sun is still not up. I'm inside the building when the sun comes up. So I never get that sunlight in the morning. And then when I'm going home, it's late. The sun has already gone down. And I'm coming home outside, brief exposure to the environment, no sunlight. And this can literally go on for weeks where potentially, unless you have a day off and you decide to go outside, your exposure to sunlight is dramatically reduced. And this may be one of the reasons why we see such an increase in all-cause mortality this time of year.
That story gave me chills because it makes me realize that there's always hope. Because here he was told he was going to die in 2 days, and is he doing well now?
He is. In fact, his mom just sent me as I was mentioning, a CT of his lung in October. Obviously, the left lung is still missing, but the right lung is fully expanded, and there's not a single sign anywhere. He's getting back on his chemotherapy, and he wants to beat this thing. And the mom is on a mission. She's like, I don't want, it's like, this is amazing. Like, why don't we know about this? And she came on the show. She gladly shared information, gladly shared the CT scan. She wants to, she wants to tell people about what happened to her son. Obviously, she wants to prevent this from happening to other people as well.
Well, I love so much about this story, and I love when something that's sad or negative or bad happens to people, they use it for good, like she's doing. And if you would like to introduce me, I would love to
Oh,
feature.
I was just gonna say, I would be more than happy to introduce you to her. She would love to come on your show and tell her son's story in her own words.
Do you
Absolutely.
think he might talk as well? Because it would be amazing.
I'm not sure. He's probably 16 now, and she even told me she's trying to balance his privacy with, also getting the story out. So, up to this point, he hasn't said anything, but she's more than willing to talk about it. Absolutely.
That's just amazing. And I know that you're a real doctor, meaning you still treat patients and,
Yeah.
doing maybe that involves sometimes procedures and pills and things like that. But I'm sure you're also familiar with the pillars of lifestyle medicine, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
the three that most people, at least that know of them, always, diet, sleep, and exercise. That's what we hear about: diet, sleep, and exercise. But I'm curious about where forgiveness stands in lifestyle medicine because it's not something, I've never gone to a doctor where they've written on the prescription pad, okay, you got to forgive people. But the reason I wanted you to talk about this is because I knew you knew about it because you did a video on MedCram about it. But because when I was first diagnosed with lung cancer a couple of years ago, before I told anybody, I had talked to Chris Wark of Chris Beat Cancer, and we had a phone call. He said, there's nothing you can do with diet, sleep, or exercise. You already got that nailed down. He goes, you got to forgive everybody. And I'm like,
Wow.
like what? How? I mean, and it's like I love the idea. I still not sure exactly how to do it, but I'm curious in your experience as a doctor and also a man of faith, what role can forgiveness have in people's lives, especially when it comes to health and healing?
Oh, absolutely. I would love to talk to you about it. And as you're mentioning that, there's a number of things that come to mind. I've always been an evidence-based physician. So whenever I tell people to do something, I will tell them what's the evidence that we have for something. And if we don't have evidence, I'll tell them how much evidence or little evidence we have, but why it still may be beneficial to do. Fortunately, I actually have some good evidence for forgiveness in terms of healing, and we'll go over that data. But as you mentioned, you're right. A lot of people know about diet, exercise, sleep. These are major pillars of health. Now, the other way I like to look at it is like links in a chain, right? Our life is like a chain, and all the links are organ systems in that body. And what we need to do is look and see which are those links that are the weakest, because those are the links that are eventually going to cause the chain to break. So we need to strengthen those things. And medicines, drugs, things of that nature, they do strengthen some of those weak links, but almost always drugs and medications will take away the strength of one link to strengthen another link. And that might be something that we need to do. Like if we see that a link is about to break, and I see this all the time in the intensive care unit. I've got a patient in congestive heart failure, and I need to do something to prevent them from not being able to breathe. So I'll give them medicines like Lasix. That's a diuretic. So that's a medication. What it's doing is it's strengthening the lung link and the heart link by what? Asking the kidney to pee out more urine. So it's taking away a little bit from the kidney link, which may be working perfectly fine, and it's adding to the heart and the lung link, which may be something that you need to do at that moment. So I think it's reasonable to still have to use medications when you need to. But here's the point. The eight pillars of health all strengthen all of the links almost all of the time. So you're not worried about these natural remedies or these health interventions that we're about to talk about. They rarely have side effects. They usually have positive benefits on multiple links. So like we're talking here with good nutrition, we have we have oodles of data that shows that good nutrition, especially plant-based nutrition, has multiple impacts, not just for mentation, your neurological abilities, but also strength, also reducing inflammation, diabetes, hypertension. Do you see here how all of the links of that chain are strengthened when you have good nutrition? Okay, that works for all of those pillars. So let's talk about what those pillars are. And I love how Dr. Nedley has put together a program up at Weimar University, which you're well aware of, called New Start, because New Start is actually the mnemonic that I like to use that names off all of those 8 pillars of health. So the N in New Start stands for nutrition. And anybody watching your show, Chef AJ, will have no doubts about what is the best nutrition because you've covered capital N so well. Okay. But after N is E, and E is exercise. Now, when people think of exercise, they may have visions in their mind of, 24-hour fitness, LA Fitness, these sorts of things where people are, in the gym 3 to 4 hours a day. Actually, this type of aggressive working out in the gym can actually cause more stress, more inflammation, and reduce the longevity of a human being. The type of exercise that I'm talking about is moderate amounts of exercise, getting outside, working in your garden, taking your dog for a walk. These are the types of exercise that I think are best, not necessarily to build muscle so you look like you're an MMA fighter, okay, or a model ready to be on some cover of a magazine. That's not what I'm asking. What I'm looking at is exercise that's for your health. And the best type of exercise for your health is moderate exercise. Okay, so that's the E. The W. What does W stand for? That's water. So not only the internal consumption of water that helps clean out your system and make sure that your kidneys have plenty of substrate to dump toxins and chemicals out through your urine, but also the external use of water, not just for cleansing of your body and making sure that you're clean. But there's another aspect of water that's really important, and that's the fact that water is one of those substances that it takes a lot of energy, a lot of heat to increase the temperature of the water. That's called enthalpy. Now, why is that important? It's important because if I want to heat up the body in a situation where we need to create a fever or stimulate the immune system, water is a perfect substance for that use because you can put a lot of energy in that water. It can raise the temperature. And when you put that water onto a human being, either in the form of a hot shower or a spa or a sauna or a hydrotherapy session, you can transfer a lot of that heat back into the body, raise the body temperature, and that will set off all sorts of immune responses that would be beneficial against fighting viruses, the flu, infections, etc. So, W is a good thing to know, especially if you're a physician that wants to augment your body's ability to fight infections. I do this all the time. If I feel like I have something coming on, I'm in the spa, I'm in the sauna, I'm doing something like that to raise body temperature. And that actually, by the way, may have some benefits in terms of cancer fighting as well that a lot of scientists haven't really looked at. So, again, another possibility there for hope. Not to say that we completely depend on just that. We should be depending on all sorts of things that have scientific basis and proof. So that's the W. Okay, that's the first word, new, N-E-W. Let's go to start. Okay, the S, we sort of talked about it a little bit, and that is sunlight. So sunlight is the S. T stands for temperance, and that's an old term that basically means don't smoke, don't drink alcohol, don't consume toxins. Make sure that the body is free of these things that are poisonous and toxins so that you don't have to deal with the downstream effects of this. So that's T. A is air. So breathing fresh air. This does not just mean like moving out of the city. We're talking about in a home, cracking the window open a little bit, allowing fresh air to come inside, having those carbon dioxide levels come down. That's healthy for your body. It's healthy for your brain. It'll make you think better and work better. Okay, the R. What does the R stand for? It stands for rest. And I'm not just talking about, as a sleep physician, a nightly rest of 7 to 8 hours per night, more if you're younger than an adult. There's also a weekly rest. Okay. And this is something that science has shown over and over again, that people who have a weekly rest allows them to, let's put it this way, uh, you're swimming underwater. Sometimes you need to poke your head up to take a breath and see what direction you're going and see if you need to change directions or adjust things. That that rest once a week allows that to happen, where you basically pull back from emails, pull back from all of these sorts of engagements with the world, and let you be yourself and be close to people and have relationships that are really important to you. That's really important because we've seen this over and over again in the research when we look at longevity, that belonging to a group of people that think like you do as well and that have the same values as you do. When you fall down, they are there to help you. They're your community. And that's really important than being alone. So that rest allows you to do that. Okay, there's the last T. What does that stand for? It stands for trust. So, a lot of people will sometimes ask me, well, do you trust this company to make this medicine? Do you trust them? And I say, no, I don't trust anybody. Trust is for friends and family. And as we'll say here, this last T, trust is for a higher power, God, I would even say. Okay, so let's be blunt. What do I do? Do I trust companies that make medications or pharmaceuticals? No. I What do I do? When I'm a scientist, I look for independent, reproducible data. That's what I look for. I don't trust anybody. If I want to look for something that's good, I want to see multiple studies independently run that show the same thing. That's data now that I can hold on to because it's independently verified. And that's the cornerstone of science. When I'm talking about trust, I'm talking about trust in somebody personally that you know. And if you have a personal relationship with God, or if you have a personal relationship with somebody of a higher power, in a type of spiritual relationship, science, there's no question about this, okay? Science has shown that that type of a relationship can be transformative in terms of your health and in terms of your mental capacity and in terms of your mental abilities and mood and all sorts of things. So obviously, I'm not going to tell you this without backing it up. So I'm going to have science that shows that it backs up what I'm talking about. And there's been numerous studies that I could cite that show that people who have good spiritual relationships can actually have good health. Now, there's plenty of evidence that also shows that people in religions and in spiritual relationships where it's bad, that can have a negative and adverse effect, right? That should make sense. If you have a good, loving relationship with family members, that's a good situation. If you have a negative relationship with family members, that's not gonna be good, even though they're family, right? That's gonna be a bad, negative relationship. So it's not every religious or every spiritual relationship that's always going to lead to good health. It has to be a healthy relationship that leads to good health. So, uh, how is that, Chef AJ, in terms of those are the 8 pillars? We're going to focus in on that last pillar a little bit, which is the T. But any comments on New Start?
Well, first of all, I thank you because I know the program very well. Several friends went to it. It's near me. I had no idea that it was an acronym.
Okay. Yeah, and if you've gone through the program, you'll see that each one of those letters has been dealt with in some way, as you can imagine, right? Nutrition, exercise, water, Did you get to go in that program into any of the spas or the whirlpools that they did?
I haven't, but I'm still thinking about the other program they have at Weimar called the Depression and Anxiety Recovery
Yes.
Program. And that one is very intriguing to me right now. Just being away from friends and family for 18 days is so long, but I have been considering it. And I've been seeing, I don't know if you know Elma Marie, who's the therapist for that program.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have been seeing her. So it's amazing. And Weimar's just, Weimar's just a place of healing in general. Even if you just go there to go to the doctor or go hiking, there's something very special about that whole place. As you know, you came to speak at the conference there that I hosted in July. So
Yes,
we
yeah. No,
love
it's
it.
it's a very special place. They really place emphasis on evidence and education, but also on the spiritual. Just to give you, you may not know this, but it's ranked one of the top 100 nursing schools in the United States, west of the Mississippi. I think 3 years in a row now they've had NCLEX scores that were 100%. They have one of the highest acceptance rates into medical school of any college in the United States. It's near 90%. So they don't trade off on academic excellence. They are very, very intent on getting good academic training, but also understanding the benefits of spiritual help as well.
Yeah. And let's not forget they make some of the best granola in the world. And
Well,
they have a cute little store there called Mart, and they sell,
yes,
and
yes.
it's made out of millet and sweet potatoes, and it's fabulous. It's interesting, the T that stands for temperance. A lot of people won't like that one. Not so much smoking. I think people know now whether they smoke or not, and whether they like smoking or not. We pretty much know it's not good. But man, you get on the topic of alcohol, and that's just a big debate, even in the plant-based world, because we're told, resveratrol, red wine, good for the heart, and but most of the doctors I know these days are not a fan of alcohol.
No, there's been some recent studies that show that really there is no safe level of consumption that's not going to lead to issues later on. And realize, of course, not everyone is alcoholic, but no, some people may not know that they are. And if they start in at even at a moderate level, that can lead to adverse outcomes. I can tell you as an intensive care physician, the amount of patients in my intensive care unit that would not have to be there if we eliminated tobacco and alcohol. We'd almost be out of business. And trust me, I would love to be out of business. There's many, many things that I would love to do with my life than being in intensive care. I have many other things that I could see. I would love it. I get no joy whatsoever in seeing people suffer in my intensive care unit. And that's why I preach all the time, literally preach all the time on smoking cessation and not drinking alcohol.
Yeah, thank you. We know that there's a link between smoking and cancer, particularly lung cancer, but does alcohol have any effect on cancer that you know of?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Alcohol has a huge impact on oral cancers, throat cancers, esophageal cancers, liver cancers. Yes, absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so let's start in with T, trust. And I said I would give you some evidence. So I want to go right to the evidence. I'm going to share with you a study that I think is an amazing study. Let me pull it up here. Hold on 1 second.
That's okay. I'll let you know when I can see the screen.
Okay, should be up.
Yes.
Great. This is a paper that was published back in 2003, and the title is called Forgiveness by God, Forgiveness of Others, and Psychological Well-Being in Late Life. So this was a study that was published out of the University of Texas at Austin and also University of Michigan. So these are pretty top schools. This is not a second-rate study by Neil Krauss and Christopher Ellison. And it was on this idea of forgiveness. Now, there's a lot of results out of this study that I'm going to sort of go over, gloss over, but I'm going to focus on one area in particular, and it's the one area that they focused on. So, if anyone wants to look this paper up, it's available on the internet. Simply just type in this title, and you'll get to the article, and you'll be able to pull up the PDF just like I did. But there's a couple of things that I found really interesting about this study. So the first thing that you'll notice is that they sent out about 1,500 surveys asking about forgiveness. Now, the first thing that I want to make sure to note here is that these surveys were only sent to Christians. And the reason why they did that was because they wanted to have what they called homogeneity. It's not because they weren't concerned about forgiveness in people who were not Christians, but they didn't want to introduce heterogeneity into the survey. They wanted to focus in on just one particular population so that they could get rid of confounding variables. Okay. So these were people that were Christians, so therefore, by definition, they believed that there was a God. They believed in God, and for people who don't know, the Christian God is one who forgives. So there's a lot of elimination here of theological differences, and they wanted to see in that background what the effect was of forgiveness on that patient population. Okay, so they asked them about a whole bunch of things: how they were feeling, the type of diseases that they had, all sorts of things, depression, anxiety, the anxiety of end of life. Remember, these were older patients. Okay, so these are patients that are going to be, may have issues with cancer or chronic diseases, things of that nature. Okay, and what they did was they broke down forgiveness into two major types. There was something called unconditional forgiveness, and then there was another type of forgiveness where somebody only forgave somebody else if that other person showed some sort of remorse for what it was that they did. Okay, so obviously they would have had to have known that they caused some sort of harm to somebody else, and they would have had to come back and say, please forgive me for doing this, that, the other. So why this was important was because they looked throughout the 1,500 surveys to say, are you somebody who forgives unconditionally, or are you somebody who forgives conditionally? So in other words, unconditionally means I don't care if you are sorry. I don't care if you come back and ask for forgiveness. I am still going to forgive you in my mind and absolve you from any sort of responsibility in terms of, fault or whatever. Meaning that if you can come back later and ask for forgiveness or not, it doesn't matter. I'm going to forgive you anyway. Okay. So that's unconditional forgiveness. And then, of course, the other type is no, I'm waiting for you to come back and say, I'm sorry, or do some sort of act of contrition that's going to then make it possible for me now to forgive you for doing that. Okay. Everyone understands it's pretty basic. So, what they found was when they looked at people who forgave unconditionally and those that forgave conditionally, that those that only forgave conditionally had greater psychological distress compared to those that forgave unconditionally. They had diminished feelings of well-being. They had higher depressed affect scores. They had more somatic symptoms of depression. So this is real, like body aches, headaches, things that happen when you're depressed. They had lower life satisfaction. And of course, something that was important in my line of work when I see these patients in the intensive care unit and we're having to treat anxiety or agitation in the ICU, they had more feelings of anxiety about dying. Okay. So again, let me just repeat that. All of these bad things that nobody really wants to have seem to be associated more with people who only forgave conditionally and seem to be lower in those people that forgave unconditionally. Okay. So this is interesting because this is an association and we cannot tell in terms of which way is causation. So in other words, it could be that people who are forgiving unconditionally, that may lead to people forgiving, that may lead to these sorts of improved well-being scores, right? Or it could be that people who are feeling better are more likely to forgive unconditionally, right? We don't know which direction that's going. We just know that they're associated with each other. Well, actually, in the study, they went through and they did a an analysis to see which one might be causing the other. And I don't want to get into all of the details of the mathematics of that, but what it seemed to indicate was that it was actually those that were forgiving unconditionally was causing the effect of having these greater life satisfaction, uh, less somatic symptoms of depression, lower depression affect scores, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So, in other words, this is evidence that it would be better for people to forgive unconditionally. Okay, but this is great. I mean, you could have published a paper just based on this, right? But no, they went further. They wanted to know what is it, if there is anything, that would tend to make somebody forgive unconditionally? What were the factors at play that would make someone forgive unconditionally versus conditionally? And this is what they showed. So, the relationship between forgiveness by God and acts of contrition. So check this out. This is all statistical mumbo jumbo, but what I want to show you here is we have age, sex, education, marital status, race, private prayer, church attendance, and forgiveness by God. Okay? And the question is, what does it do to the chances that somebody is going to forgive unconditionally, which is the good thing? So notice that age was almost near to one. Okay, so really, as you get older, it really doesn't change much about whether or not you forgive conditionally or unconditionally. Sex, on the other hand, did have a little bit of a way mark. So in other words, there was a difference between men and women. I believe I'd have to go back and look. I can't remember what they associated with, if it was women or men. I can't remember off the top of my head, but that's irrelevant. Education, because you can't change sex, right? Uh, at least not for this study. Education. Interestingly, there was a slight improvement here. The more education you had, the more you were likely to forgive unconditionally. Okay, but it was extremely small, very, very, like 13 thousandths of a percentage of a point there. All right, what about marital status? Seemed to increase the chances of forgiving unconditionally. What about race? Again, I would have to look back and see exactly which race was it that allowed you to forgive unconditionally. I don't know that, but because that's not the point of what I'm talking about. You can't change that, right? All right, private prayer didn't seem to have much of a difference. So people who pray privately didn't seem to increase the chances of you forgiving unconditionally. Church attendance didn't really seem to. So in other words, going to church or not going to church, not really much of a change there because it's pretty close to one. But notice, and I think you probably all jumped down to look at this, all of a sudden this whopper of an association comes out, and what do you see here? 2.5 times more likely to forgive unconditionally if somebody had the belief that they were forgiven by God. Think about that. Think about this. Think about the fact that if you were if in your mind you were assured of the fact that you were forgiven by God, you would be ostensibly more likely to forgive unconditionally, and as a result of that, lose out on all of these bad things that are associated with conditional forgiveness. Chef AJ, what do you think?
Well, I think it's amazing that, first of all, that somebody even took the time to study something like this you know, and it really gives a lot of people food for thought when they're have a hard heart and just, a lot of people say, I'm never going to forgive so and so for something. But
Right.
maybe if you know you're doing it for your own health, you maybe would consider doing it.
Yes, and I would expect that if such a specific thing like this has that wide-reaching of an effect on just these factors that we're talking about here, that there are probably other aspects of that intervention that we probably don't even know about because we haven't asked. So, for those who are not Christian, to understand what it is that we're talking about here, I'm trying to explain what it is. is that, the Christian viewpoint here of forgiveness and a God that forgives is that we have done something wrong. We have fallen short of where we should have been. And there's this understanding of a substitutive atonement of what God does is God takes the penalty for what we have done, for which he had no part in, and we get to take the reward of God instead in a part that we had no part in. So the best way I can explain this is imagine you are driving on the freeway, and as very common here in Southern California, is you will be going well over the speed limit just to keep up with traffic. And imagine you hear that whoop whoop behind you and you get pulled over. And imagine a cop car comes to you, or the cop comes up to you and is writing out your ticket for a speeding ticket that you know that you are assuredly guilty of because you're going 80 miles an hour and it's well over the speed limit. And he gives you the ticket, and then you look at the ticket and you see that yes, it's a ticket for speeding, and it's got, the infraction on it, but instead of your name at the top of the ticket, the cop writes his name at the top of the ticket. In other words, he's the one that's going to show up in court. He's the one that's going to get the point deduction off of his score. He's the one that's going to have to pay the fee for speeding. And he explains this to you, and you're like bewildered. You're like, what is going on here? This doesn't make any sense. And you're like, I feel this is like my lucky day. So the question is how do you feel at that point? Are you going to, after he goes back in his car and he says, you can go, are you going to peel out of that shoulder on the freeway and go back to going 80 miles an hour? Probably not, because you've realized that what you've done has hurt somebody else, but they have forgiven you. And that's exactly the dynamic that we're talking about here. Now, imagine somebody's coming up from behind and they see the cop car and they see the speed limit and they're going over the speed limit. What are they going to do? They're going to slow down, right? So here's something really interesting. Both the person in the car that came upon this scene is slowing down, and you driving the car realize that you've just gotten away with something because of grace and because of forgiveness. And you're both going the same speed. But can you see how you can't tell from looking at the outside what's really going on in the minds of those two people? And what's going on in the minds of those two people are extremely different things. One person has just realized that they have been forgiven, right? And that's why they're going the speed limit. The other person is going the speed limit because they don't want to get a ticket. Do you see the difference? Now imagine that person now is driving home, the first person, the one that got their ticket forgiven, and they're driving home and they come home into their house and they come inside and realize this is on their mind. They've just been forgiven. Okay. And they walk inside and something happens to them. I don't know. Maybe their spouse comes up to them and says, hey, I did something today. I'm so sorry about it. How do you think that person is going to react to that, knowing what just happened to them? They're going to be more likely to forgive, regardless if that person is contrite or not. And that's exactly what we're seeing here in this study. But instead of a cop, okay, it is the person that they put the most ultimate trust in, and that is trust in God. And knowing every day as part of your belief system that you have put on the cross the King of the universe, but that King of the universe has said, you know what? I love you so much that I'm going to write the ticket out and I'm going to put my name on there. Imagine that being part of your belief system day in, day out. You can't help but see how that's going to be if someone actually truly believes that, because we know that there are Christians who are nominal Christians who don't really believe this stuff, and then there are Christians who actually believe this stuff. And this is exactly what this study is showing. If you look at the survey where the Christians that are surveyed in this study actually believe that they are forgiven by God, they are going to be far more likely to forgive unconditionally and far more likely to miss out on all of those things that I have listed there in the study. So, how do I put this into use practically? If I'm in the intensive care unit and I'm lucky enough to have a patient that is awake and alert and not intubated or sedated that I can't interact with. A lot of times what I will do is I will talk to them, offer to pray with them, but praying with them is, as you can see here, is not enough, right? Just praying with them is not enough. They need to know, because you know that if they're in the intensive care unit, they're reviewing their life, right? Anybody that's in the intensive care unit has to be reviewing their life because they're in the intensive care unit. They know that they're sick enough to be in the intensive care unit, anything could happen. And they're probably thinking about all of these things that they've done in their life and all the people that they've harmed and the anxiety of knowing that this is how it may end. It's a wonderful thing for to go to these people and to ask them, look, if there's anything that you've done in your life, and this may be a little bit jarring, right? Because if the doctor is saying this, then they're like, man, I must be really bad off if you're telling me to make amends and get right with people. But I tell them this is what we all should do because it's good for our souls. And actually, what the science is saying, Chef, is that if we do this for people in the intensive care unit, that just doing that may actually give them less pain, less anxiety, less stress, less depression, knowing that there is a God that they trust that forgave them for this. And that's a burden lifted off of them, and now their body and their mind can concentrate on the task at hand, which is getting better. It's transformative when you think about this. And I can say with pretty much general confidence is that there are so many diseases that people suffer from that are completely, and I'm not saying this is all in their mind or that they're imagining it. They're real diseases that people suffer from completely as a result of the way that they think and that the way that they behave and the way that they interact with other people and their lack of faith. There are whole diseases that could potentially go away in individuals if they learned how to think and understand what their environment is. If you understand what I'm saying, it's actually transformative.
Yeah. Do you have any more slides or is this the
This is
only?
it. Yeah. No,
Okay,
this is
okay.
it.
I mean, if you want to stop sharing, then I can see you
Oh
bigger.
yeah. Yeah. Let me stop sharing. Here you
A
go.
couple of things.
Yeah.
The religion that I was raised in, Judaism, I believe our God is forgiving as well. We have a whole day devoted to forgiveness where we can't eat or drink. It's called Yom Kippur. I remember that from when I'm little. That was quite something. So I'm curious for people that aren't believers, though, can forgiveness still help them?
Absolutely. There's a lot of things that can help. All of these things that we're talking about is can be helpful. And of course, when I talk about Christianity, much of the theology of Christianity is derived from Judaism. So yeah, Yom Kippur, that is the Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement, correct?
Yeah, the Day of Atonement. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the 10th day of the seventh month, and that can go usually in like September, October, right? Generally
Usually, yeah.
speaking.
It's
Yeah.
always hot. Whenever it is, it's always the hottest day of the year. It's
Yeah,
funny.
so a lot of this has to do with it's very, very similar. In fact, most Christians would even tell you that the God that they worship is the God of Judaism. So, um, but your question more specifically is people who are atheists or people who don't believe in God or people who have a different faith, can they also benefit from forgiveness? Yeah, I believe so. I think the studies show that, in fact, that even in studies where they don't look at particular religions, that is actually the fact that forgiveness is good for the body, for the soul, and for those sorts of things. My experience, though, is in that kind of an environment of spiritual connection with Christianity.
One of the things that helped me when I was learning to forgive, and I'm not even sure I know how, because my next question was going to be, well, how do we do it? Is that that the pastors that I've met with said that forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean reconciliation.
No, yeah. So this is tricky, right? So when we say forgive, does that mean that the person no longer needs to pay for what they've done? No, that doesn't mean that. There is there are all sorts of things that society, that justice may demand, that is outside of our decision to forgive or to not forgive. I think that that's perfectly fine. So you don't need to have somebody get away with something for you to be able to say that you've forgiven them. Uh, Forgiveness is something that you do in your body on somebody else, and it doesn't have to do with what the law says or what the responsibility of that person is. It's something that we have done where we are no longer interested in pursuing retaliation and things of that nature that is personal. I think that's just one of the many manifestations that we would see with forgiveness.
It's just it kind of reminds me of that saying, let go and let God.
There you go. Absolutely.
Do you
Yeah.
have actual steps to forgiveness that you do? Like, do you just say it in your head, like I release you, or out loud, or
I don't actually. For me, and again, I'm sort of biblical based and Christian. The text that I go back to that I try to emphasize in my own mind, and it's hard to do this with people who are not Christian, because they wouldn't understand is this text in Matthew 18 where there's a whole parable on this, where there's this king that is going through his debts and finds that this guy owes him a huge amount of debt, and this guy 10,000 talents, which is a huge amount of money. And he comes in and he says, "Hey, look, pay me the money back, or I'm going to throw you in prison. I'm going to throw your wife in prison. I'm going to sell your children to slavery. I'm going to take everything you've got." Uh, it's actually, by the way, it reminds me a little bit of the Jews in Persia when Haman came to power and tried to do that to the Jews. There's a whole holiday called Purim based on that. And so he gets down on his knees, he prays to the king, says, "Please don't do this." And the king says, "Okay, I will forgive you the debt." So he forgives him the whole debt, incredibly. And this guy is on cloud nine. He goes out, and the first thing is he sees another fellow servant of the king who owes him just a measly amount of money. It turns out like 100 denarii, which is just a small amount of money. And he grabs him by the neck and he says, "Pay me everything that you owe me. Otherwise, I'm going to do." He names the same thing that the king was going to do to him. And the king, and as he's doing this, the guy says, "Please, I don't have the money. Please let me pay you. I'll pay you in full. Just give me some time." And some of the king's friends sees this interaction, and they go back and tell the king, and the king is really upset and calls this guy in on the carpet. Says, "Hey, you fool! I just forgave you 10,000 talents, and you turn around and do this to somebody else for a fraction of what I just forgave you." No, he says, "I my forgiveness is over, and you're going back into prison, and this is." And Christ basically says this parable says, "Look, this is what your God is going to do to you if you don't also forgive." So what do I get from that? It's not a very good story on the surface because it kind of admonishes you to forgive. But what I do is I kind of look at the biggest thing in that story is the payment, right? The 10,000 versus the small little thing. So what that often does to me is it makes me look at the magnitude of what someone has done to me versus what I've done to him. Okay. And I put that in perspective and I realize that my groveling over this small little thing is such a small thing compared to what I've been forgiven that what do I have to complain about? Right. I think that kind of helps me. Now, that may not work so well. You may have to work at it longer if something dramatic has happened to you. Let's say, I mean, there's people like this and it's very sad. People whose whole families have been wiped out by a gunman or someone's, daughter or son that has been killed by some drunk driver. I mean, we hear these horrible stories all the time. That's hard to swallow. And I'm not here to tell you that Pollyanna and you can do this. It's easy. It's not easy. It's difficult. But what's even more difficult is holding on to it and letting it destroy you as a person and your physical well-being. So to be able to prevent it from that damage that's happened from extending not only to just the damage that's happened, but also extending into your body and what it can do to you. The best way to shut that door, to turn off that door on the submarines that prevent the flooding from getting throughout the entire to shut that door, that safety door, is forgiveness because it detaches you from that event in a way that allows you to grieve perhaps and allows you to interact and do things in a normal way, but at the same time prevents all of these negative effects. It's not easy to do. Not here to tell you it's easy to do. It's very difficult, but it's something that takes time. It doesn't happen like this. You can't just say, I'm going to forgive you, and you just walk the other direction. Very hard to do that. You've got to work through it. It's a process, but it's possible.
Well, it's so funny because I listen to somebody might have heard of him, Pastor Rick Warren. He has a podcast, Daily Hope. I listen to him every day, and literally today he just told that story you just told.
Okay.
That is so funny. You
Yeah.
know, here's the thing, for just like many of the other pillars of lifestyle medicine, like sunlight, I mean, forgiveness is free. And so
Yep.
people could try it. If it doesn't work, what if they lost? It didn't cost them any money. It didn't probably cost them that much time. They could try it and see if it helps.
It's absolutely true. Yeah, it's very little downside. As we mentioned, most of the natural remedies in these pillars, there's only upside. There's no downside.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the pillars, I forgot to ask you when you said it, you talked about cracking a window. I live with a man that never allows me to open a window, and it's like I can't wait to play this for him. But I'm curious, do you have any recommendations for like indoor air purifiers or things
Oh
like
yeah. We actually interviewed Dr. Joseph Allen on our MedCram channel for those who want to learn a little bit more about it. Kyle, my partner at MedCram, interviewed him, and he's a Harvard professor. He's the one that actually invented the term sick buildings. And the chemicals that come off. And so when you're inside the house and there's manufactured items in your house, they give off chemicals, plastics and things that can get into the air, carbon dioxide. So opening up that air allows that stuff to go through. But as you're mentioning here, if you're talking about, let's say, dust, if you're talking about smoke, things that might be getting into the house, you can actually make a fairly simple air filter by getting the MERV 13s, putting it into a box, taping it together, putting a fan on top, and just blowing that air, and actually can have a dramatic effect on the air quality. I know, for instance, in the wintertime, we have a wood burning stove because we live up about 3,000 feet here in Southern California, and when I would clean out the ash out of the fireplace, even though I used a vacuum to take up the excess stuff that was coming up as dust, when I would step back and look at the sun coming into the room, I would see all of these particles just sort of floating in the air. After we turned on some of the air filters that were just sitting in the room, that's all gone. And so the air, it's very effective at getting particulates out of the air, especially if you have difficulty with breathing and asthma. But remember, these things will not scrub out carbon dioxide. So it's still important to, if you can, open the door. And in fact, one of the things that he showed on the podcast was a carbon dioxide meter. Costs about $150 to $200, some of the good ones. But it's a really good way of just showing you what is the carbon dioxide in the room that you're breathing. And you really want that number to be, down by 500, not over 1,000. So we did this actually with my son in his room where he's sleeping. He always closed the doors, closed the window, and we could show very easily that it had gone up to over 1,000 just by opening one of the doors of the room. Um, the air would exchange, and that was able to really bring down carbon dioxide levels. You just need to crack the window open a little bit, even though the room might be a little bit cooler when you're sleeping. That's actually really good for your sleep to have the room a little bit cooler. You could always bundle up a little bit, but that extra carbon dioxide ventilation is going to do wonders for your health.
I keep hearing they have the room cooler, and that's the one thing we live in an 80-degree home all year round. That's probably not ideal. That's what I miss about Southern California in the desert. I was always nice and warm.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So I want to switch gears for a minute, Dr. Schwalb, because as a pulmonary doctor and a critical care doctor, you probably often have to order chest x-rays or CT scans for your patients. And you might be the first person that identifies that a person has cancer, specifically lung cancer. So what's that like for you? And how is that to deliver that news? And how do you deliver it?
Yeah, what I try to do is introduce the idea slowly. I think it's rarely have I ever had to say to somebody who had no clue that you've got lung cancer. Um, so typically what happens is they will get a CT scan or a chest X-ray for some other reason, either because maybe they fell down and they got an X-ray and it showed something in the lung, So what I will tell them is if there's a spot in the lung, I will say, we don't know what this is, but it could be an infection, it could be completely benign, or it could be a malignancy. So at least it's in the realm of their understanding. They have time to think about it, process it, understand that it's a possibility, right? And then usually what happens is we'll watch it to see if it grows or if it's big enough to put a needle into. And so most of the time when people are coming to my office and they're going to learn that they have lung cancer, it's because they've had a biopsy. Because ultimately that's the only really way to know for sure that something is a lung cancer. Um, Other than we could be very, very suspicious, obviously, if something looks like a cancer and it's lighting up on a PET scan and it's growing, it's almost assuredly a cancer, but we can't say that it is until we actually have a biopsy. There's an expression in the business called no meat, no treat, right? So that's what the oncologist would say. No meat, no treat. They're not going to give you chemotherapy or treatment for a cancer unless they can see that it actually is, because let's face it, the risks of chemotherapy are fairly high. We would never want to expose somebody to those risks unless we knew for sure that that's what it was that they had.
Right.
So, but I think your question is more along the lines of how do you break it to them? How do you say this? So usually by the point that I'm telling them this, they have an understanding that it's possible, and I try to say it in a way that I know when I say the word cancer that they're not going to remember 50% of what I said afterwards because things are going to be racing in their heads. They're going to be thinking about so many other things. So I try to keep things very simple and I try to keep things written down and not say too much, but to direct them at what we're going to do about it and the hope that they might get for it. So fortunately, in many of the cases, usually the cancer is found at an early stage, early enough that it's possible to do resection and actually cut it out and cure them of that cancer. Especially now with modern techniques where we actually do screening and we check CT scans every year. By the way, I'll just put this out there since we're talking about it, is that if somebody is between the ages of 50 and 80, and they've smoked for more than 20 pack years. That means smoking one pack a day for more than 20 years. And they're able to go through surgery. And it's been more than 15 years. Sorry, it's been less than 15 years since they quit smoking. We recommend doing a low dose CT scan. That means a CT scan that has low dose radiation associated with it to see whether or not they have nodules. Why? Because we want to catch these things early so that we can cut them out and potentially cure them of that cancer. So that's what we do. Sometimes, though, we catch it too late and it's already spread to the lymph nodes. And in that case, we cannot cure them. It's like trying to close the barn door after the horse has already escaped out of the barn. So in those situations, we try to go for uh, treatment to control it, to extend life as long as we possibly can. And I'll tell you, there's certain cases that we've had where people have had lung cancer that was diagnosed late, and it's been years, decades maybe in some of these cases. So it is possible to put this in check and to improve. One of the ways that I believe of being able to do that is if we help the immune system to take care of that cancer. And how do we do that? We hit those 8 pillars of health that we talked about. New Start. So that's one of the ways that we can help do that. But at the end of the day, I tell them, look, you're going to see prognosis. The oncologist is going to tell you, look, this has got a 15% 4-year survival. And you're going to say, great, I only have a 15% chance of being alive in 4 years. What I try to focus on and tell them is this, look, that's with all comers. That's not that's not necessarily with you. There's some people that are more, there's some people that are less. If you have a desire and a will to do better and to turn your life around more than other people would do generally, there's no telling how much lifespan you can have on this. This is only telling you what the general lifespan is for all comers. But if you want to be different, if you want to do things differently, who knows? Nobody can predict the future. We don't have crystal balls. We just have data and statistics.
Yeah. So that's how you impart hope on people that have been diagnosed with cancer?
Well, that's the first part. And then of course the second part is what we've talked about. So NEWSTART and then T at the end of course is trust in God. And usually at that point pray and then get into what we just talked about.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible for people to thrive even in the face of cancer?
Oh, of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that story you shared about the teenage boy, even though it wasn't cancer, that just shows me miracles can happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Schwaltz, so much for your work.
Thank you.
And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ and Friends. Please come back tomorrow as we continue this conversation on thriving in the face of cancer. Take care, everyone.